Why do we join organizations? Remember back in high school, you didn't care what the organization did as long as that special person was in it. So you would join it. As you got a little bit older, you would kind of be wiser and decide that, hey, am I interested in what this organization's doing, or is it just going to be fun? Eventually, as we grow older and wiser, we look into what does the organization stand for. So let's see what C stands for. Start off with, C has a mission statement. A lot of organizations figured they needed to have a statement saying what are we doing so that they could work just towards that and not get distracted. So here's the boring part. C is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting education and awareness of shoreline habitats and the wildlife populating the southern Oregon coast. That's a mouthful. So we have broken it down a little bit. We have objectives and goals. And so what we're looking at is trying to preserve and conserve the natural resources on our southern coast. We're also trying to inform citizens about what is there and visitors from other parts of our country and the world as to what we have in our southern Oregon coast. Of course, there was that nonprofit part there so that we can raise money to have funds to carry out our goals and objectives. And we also have a goal of trying to cooperate with government and non-government organizations so that we all can accomplish more. So that's the mission statement, first thing I was asked to talk about. So let's have a little history of C. How many of you out there, high school history, fell asleep in the back row when they were doing the lectures? I was one. So I won't go over 32 years of C's history. Oh, excuse me, it's 35. I would really put you to sleep. I'm just going to talk about the founding of C, the 2 years, including time just before, until we really got going. In 1990, we had some problems similar to what we're still facing today. People climbing up on the rocks and crushing the organisms that live there, and people picking up poor little harbor seals and taking them to some place of safety because they didn't see Mom. And so what was done was the local free flight agency, which was a rehab center for wildlife, and the operator of that got all his volunteers together and said, what can we do? And so the group decided that putting up signs around the animals would not protect them very well. Needed to have a human presence there to help educate people about what was going on. So Dan Duell, who was the operator of the free flight, said, go for it. So the group ended up forming and having an armband to identify themselves as part of Beach Watch. And they would go out in groups of 2 to 4. They would start in the morning and go till dark and try to help educate the public and keep them off the rocks and keep them from taking these animals to places like Bend, which has been done. Okay. Now, one of the things this group really did try to do was keep communication with the public. They talked to the local newspaper, they talked to city government, anybody that would listen, they would tell what they were doing, and everybody was behind them until 2 events happened. One time they had visitors climbing rocks, and the water was so noisy, coming and going, coming and going, they had to blow a whistle to get their attention. Well, these people complained that this group down there was blowing a whistle at us. But on site, they said, oh, we understand. We'll stay off the rocks and leave the animals alone. Another thing happened shortly thereafter. An entertainment group from Ireland decided to go to the beach on their day off. They were going down the stairs. They met the volunteers, and they got talking, and everybody was happy. Well, when the entertainers came back out, they talked about how terrible these volunteers had spoken to them. And so there was a lot of controversy in the local news, Eugene even asked one of the people in this area if she could get a story about what was going on. So it wasn't just Bandon that got involved. So Beach Watch backed off. Because one of the things that was going on is one of the members had a German accent. And this was still close enough in time that a lot of people thought, we have a beach Gestapo out here. And they were calling the group the Beach Nazis. And unfortunately, this man who they were talking about had to escape Europe to get away from Hitler. So it was like, no way was he a Nazi. These were just good-hearted people trying to save our resource. So they decided, let's reorganize this. Fall back, regroup, let's work on our public relations. Go forward from that. We need a new organization. So the volunteers, which were headed up more or less by Sarah Duvall and Owen Duvall, talked to Bill and Joan Russell about, let's form a new organization, one that's going to educate the public. Sarah was kind of quiet and shy and didn't want to push herself out onto anything, whereas Bill, man, if there was a person to talk to, he would corner him and tell him what his latest campaign was. So they went and they talked to people like Haystack Rock Awareness Program. They got the regional director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help organize, and they got an area supervisor of Oregon State Parks to help them come up with how do we do this. So this will be the only time I'll get into names. Is the chairman was Bill Russell. These are the founders. The vice chair, Sarah Duvall. A person that people don't usually hear about is Chuck Newton. He was the secretary, and he ended up moving to Eugene later on, but he was involved in laying the foundation for C. The treasurer was Owen Duvall. And Joan Russell, she would do just about anything that needed to be done. These four, the Duvalls and the Russells, continued in these roles. Sometimes they'd shift them around. New roles would come up that they would have to have, like a volunteer coordinator, an education coordinator, and they would all just take turns filling out and making things happen. So some of the things that they had to do was a new name. And one of the members suggested Shoreline Education for Awareness. C. Boy, what a neat little acronym there. They also formed an advisory committee. Fish and Wildlife Service, both federal and state, were involved. School District 54 was involved. The state parks, OSU Extension, and the city of Bandon. So they were trying to be in the lifelines of all these organizations so everybody would know what was going on. And you want to talk about transparency, that's what they were trying to do in those days. Some of the other things that they had to do to get started was all this paperwork it takes to become a nonprofit organization. And some of that paperwork we still have today because we're required to keep it forever. Other things they had to do is design a logo. We've changed it once. They had to come up with a training program. The original training program was like 2 nights a week for 3 months, I believe it was. And they felt like they were back in college. Some of the other things that they had to do was, where are we going to do this education? And they came up with Masonic Point, which is Coquille Point, just its older name, and Face Rock. That's where it all got started. And the 4 members of these 2 families had to loan their personal optics, their scopes and binoculars, to see in order for them to have anything to work with until they could raise money. Oh, that was something else they had to do, was raise money. So on September 9th, 1991, they officially became a nonprofit organization with permission to go ahead. Other things they had to do, and we take for granted that they're always there, is they had to come up with sandwich boards. They did a publication called C-Scope, which came out quarterly, sometimes monthly. They had school programs. They had to design what they wanted to do with schools. Of course, the uniforms, because they needed to be identified by something other than that armband. The brochures, they had to write and get printed and come up with the relations with the agencies. And they also developed a training manual about like this that covered all of the different things that we might possibly run into in our field. Well, in 1992, Bill and Sarah were elected to the city council. And as they put it, they were called the damned environmentalists because of their association with sea. And I think that's probably about all of the history any of us can handle for one time.